So you three are, you know, conduct part of the contact tracing operations at UAlbany, correct? Can we just like sort of go around and everyone tell me sort of what your role is and what you do?
So my name is Crystal Baker, and I am on the student support team at UAlbany. I am a contact tracer. We do wellness checks to make sure that the students are doing okay while they're in isolation or quarantine. And it's really important that we reach out to them because we are a lifeline for them while they're alone in isolation. And so that way they have someone to talk to and give them resources if they need it. Is that okay?
That's perfect. Taylor, you're up.
Hi, my name is Taylor Perre, and I am also on the student support team at UAlbany. And we are doing the wellness phone calls every day to students who are in isolation or quarantine. And we are also contacting students from our pooled surveillance testing to let them know that they are presumed to be positive. And then we do follow up with the wellness calls every day after that, or almost every day after that, depending on the caseload, just to see how they're doing, see if they need anything, see if they have any questions.
Perfect. And Derek, what do you do?
I'm actually the staff member that's assigned to kind of lead the day-to-day operations of the team. I helped put it together and build the team with the students. Each day I kind of put together the call list, all the data and stuff from the students, update their profiles and their case information. So students have all that information to make all the calls, and then I just work with them throughout the day to make sure the calls are going okay. If there's any other issues or anything comes up and we need to figure out how to get student resources, get them some help, get them tested, those types of things throughout the day. So, or if we got to connect them to resources, I'll work with the students who are making the calls in the background to facilitate that process.
Can you tell me about how contact tracing works on campus? Like, how do you determine if someone's a prolonged contact or has had prolonged contact?
So, you know, to be clear, we're doing a little bit more than just contact tracing. Contact tracing, a lot of that responsibility falls on Albany County. When the information does come to the school, we're going to facilitate that process in a couple different ways, provide them information of the close contacts and stuff like that. So we'll help quarantine the students, their roommates, you know, their close associates, people they had class with, we'll quarantine those, and then isolate the students also. And we'll facilitate that side on the contact support side by reaching out to the surveillance cases, notifying them of the positive test results that Taylor mentioned, helping them get a test result scheduled, get that test in, facilitate the move into the isolation space, and then the same thing for all the close contacts with quarantine. So we do less of the identifying because that responsibility lies with the Albany County. And now our emergency management office also assists with that. They identify the people and we reach out to them and coordinate with them and help them on that side to actually move into their location. So through the surveillance and the wellness program is one of the primary functions we handle day to day, and we supplement the contact tracing part that's done by emergency management and also done by Albany County.
Are students responsible for maintaining a list of close contacts each day? Like, how do you sort of keep track of that?
Sure. So a lot of it's actually the nice part of it, doing it at a university, a lot of that's actually already built in the way classes are structured. So we have class lists, we have students identified through class lists. We obviously have dorms set up so we know who's roommates and who's what. So a lot of that is automatic from that standpoint. And then it's going to be done through the traditional interview process at the county and emergency management office level. We also have a survey process. So students, when they're identified as isolation or quarantine case, they'll fill out a survey online to provide additional information and go through the questionnaire too, in addition to the calls.
So those calls that Taylor and Crystal are making, they're probably not always pleasant calls. It's probably not fun to be the one to deliver bad news to someone that they have to stay indoors for the next 2 weeks. Could you sort of walk me through what that phone call sounds like? Like what is the biggest objection you get from students when you give them a call and say, sorry, you got to quarantine?
It does come as a surprise for some of them because they might not have symptoms, or they might not have symptoms for the full 2 weeks that they're there. So letting them know the importance of why they do have to stay the full 2 weeks, or why they do have to stay the full 10 days, and just reiterate how important it is to keep the community safe as well as just the campus community. Some people don't mind it. They like the alone time. They like to be able to catch up on their schoolwork, but for a lot of people, it's tough. It's really tough for a lot of people. So just letting them know that we're here to answer their questions, and we can connect them with the counseling center if they need it, or academic services if they need it. Letting them know that there are people here to help you, to connect you with the resources.
Crystal, what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about when you're contagious and the incubation period and how the virus is transmitted?
I think a lot of times people, especially students who are in isolation or quarantine for exposure, they are like, well, I just tested negative, so I can go home right away. And a lot of times we have to reiterate that you need to stay in isolation for the safety of yourself and community, because you could still be a potential spreader. So, you know, it's frustrating, but it's very important that they understand that, and it can be confusing sometimes.
Do you feel like is the majority of cases on campus, are they asymptomatic? So it's like hard to convince someone that they're actually sick?
I don't know exactly like the percentage of how many are asymptomatic, but I do know a decent amount of them are. But you know, most of them are pretty understanding about it once we talk to them about it, and they understand that it's protocol, and we start explaining how it works. They're usually okay with it.
Yeah, I would say Crystal's probably pretty spot on that most of the cases we deal with are, you know, asymptomatic, and that's where it really gets difficult, especially when, you know, the person tested positive, doesn't have any symptoms, and then all their close contacts are all quarantining and none of them have symptoms. So then that's really kind of ups it, because you get a lot of that, well, my friend who was positive, they have no symptoms, so what's the issue here? I've got negative tests. And then, you know, like they mentioned, just constantly explaining the process and why it's important to everybody.
Yeah.
So the pool test comes back. There's how many samples are in one pool test?
So
Are you
I
able
don't know if you want me to answer this or you let them answer.
Yeah, I guess, Derek, do you want to talk about how the process works with pool testing? Like, how are you able to take apart the samples, or do kids have to get tested afterwards?
Yes, so the way the sampling is working right now, at the beginning of the semester, we were doing 4 samples to a pool. Now it's down to 2. They've got a little bit better and faster at their results. And then what happens with the pool when it comes back positive, the CDC recently changed their guidelines, so they're actually able to retest both the samples that went into the pool, and they can identify the sample within that pool that is positive. So then that's information they give to our team, and then we'll make the calls from there. So it's somewhat of a range where there's a viral load that they get on for the pool, and they identify the higher risk of the 2, and then that's who we'll call. I guess that explains it a little simple, but usually our test is the RNA Institute at UAlbany is very good. Their lab works extremely hard, and their results are pretty accurate across the board. When we find somebody who is a presumptive positive at that point, it's pretty much very likely that they're going to be positive, unless maybe they had COVID in the past, or maybe they weren't aware of it. That might be the situation. If they didn't get tested and weren't confirmed as positive in the past, that might be the case. But pretty much almost everybody will come back positive at that point through that surveillance program, if they are a part of a presumptive pool.
So Taylor, what do you tell someone if they say, I already had COVID? This is, you know, just sort of residual antibodies from, or whatever, or RNA traces from before.
Well, first, we do tell them that they are not supposed to continue participating in the pooled sample program because they did previously test positive. And then we work with them to get them out of quarantine. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that would be so. I think the beginning of the semester was the only time we really ran into that issue, because, you know, what would happen at that point if we had somebody who was already positive in the past, would say, you know, explain you can't really participate in the program anyway, the way the testing. If they're symptomatic at that point, we might instruct them to go get a diagnostic test through Student Health Services or through WellNow or a local urgent care. But at that point, if they were non-symptomatic, it would just be an explanation that they can't participate. And like Taylor said, you know, if they're in isolation quarantine, we'll work through the process to kind of get them moved out of there as somebody who has already been positive. So
the assumption is if they don't have symptoms and they've already had it, chances are like they're not eligible for screening. They're most likely are COVID negative.
Yeah, exactly. So depending on when that test, when they tested positive in the past, I think the guidelines right now are about 90 days for the CDC from when you can take a diagnostic test again that won't show positive. But yes, that's generally going to be the guidance. Is it's really the surveillance program's too sensitive, and it'll test that virus for a longer period of time. I think when we move into the spring semester, we'll probably, the possibility of somebody testing positive again will be likely, so that we'll start that program again with them in the spring.
So for those of us who haven't been through like a 2-week quarantine period on campus, when you had all these expectations for what your semester might be like, do you want to, like, Crystal, what's sort of the mental health challenges that students are dealing with?
So some of the mental health challenges that these students face while in isolation is, one, being alone all the time. They have to go from being on campus to being in their dorm, even in a familiar place, to literally unpacking their life and moving to another place of isolation, whether it be one of our isolation rooms or something else. And that's very stressful. And then being alone just for 2 weeks can be very, very hard. On top of it, if you're asymptomatic, it can just feel like you're there for no reason, and that can be stressful. And so a lot of times we offer like breathing exercises. We tell them different things that they can do to alleviate those stressors and the feelings that they're experiencing. And
What,
yeah.
like, how do they describe it? Like, is there a descriptor? Do they say it's like being in prison? Like, how do they describe the feeling of being alone for 2 weeks?
A lot of them are frustrated. They're like, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I just want to go home. I don't want to be here. My friends are already going home, or they're not testing positive, so why do I have to be here? It's very normal frustration, anxiety. Sometimes, people, sometimes students are a little bit sad. It's very normal, common things.
If they are presumed positive, do they have the option of going home, or they have to isolate?
I believe they have to isolate, because depending on the test result, their chances of being positive are more increased. So you definitely don't want them going home and traveling and spreading it to their friends and family or anyone in between. So it is important to quarantine if that's the case, or isolate.
Just to kind of add on that part, it's generally encouraged that students isolate or quarantine at home if that's an option. We'll work with them to kind of arrange transportation if they can go home, like if they can have a parent come pick them up safely while they're awaiting results and those types of things. Obviously, if they're positive, that becomes a little bit more difficult at that point, and they can transport themselves home and then isolate from that point. We do our best. We tell students, you can't take public transportation. There's nothing like that. If there's a way we can transport them home safely at that point, we can do so if it's local and those types of things. As long as it can be done in a safe manner, that's probably going to be best. When they're with their family and kind of can get resources that way, it's probably the best, and it kind of lowers some of the demand on the university when that case is. So we usually encourage that across the board if possible and can be done safely.
If students are quarantined because they've just been exposed, can they live together with other quarantined students? Like, is quarantine housing separate from isolation?
It is separate, but what you mentioned is an option to a point, but it has to meet the Department of Health kind of guidelines for isolation and quarantine usually. So obviously isolation is a lot more strict in what needs to be done there, and protocols regarding trash and shared spaces, masking, those things. Those individuals who are in isolation are usually completely separate from everybody else. Quarantines, they can have a little bit of shared space. So usually they'll have a shared bathroom would be the only, and then there's requirements for cleaning the bathrooms, and then, not interacting on trash and stuff like that. And then otherwise they're kind of, they're part of the sweep. It has closed doors and they're not going to be in those spaces at the same time, usually on that. But for the most part, capacity at the university is pretty well. So we don't really, even during the pause phase over the last couple of weeks, there's not really a lot of students who have to do that unless it's kind of a convenience thing. So if a whole suite is quarantining and all the timelines align appropriately, then sometimes they might do that out of a convenience factor when everything is aligned on that point. But then when somebody becomes positive at that point, they're going to be separated and split up and then moved into isolation at that time.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So I guess, are there sort of events like virtual, like how has sort of campus life changed to accommodate students that are isolated or in quarantine?
That's a good question. Well, classes were all online, I think, after November 18th. So for the students who were in isolation or quarantine more recently, they were able to do their classes online. And that's all I'm aware of, really. I'm not sure about campus events or anything like that.
Yeah, for the most part, the campus didn't really do a lot of stuff. I know that there was one of the groups, the energy sustainability on campus. They did some like remote stuff where we kind of got together and spoke as like remotely on like different ideas of what we could do to like engage students and to still spread awareness of like sustainability and stuff. I'm still active in a couple other groups, also remotely. So we're still meeting, but it is limited, like just remote. There's not really much on campus. As for services for students, CAP's office is the counseling center, is still offering virtual services, which is really great. We also recommend that to students who are in isolation and quarantine. And there's a number of other services on campus that you can still speak to someone remotely or even by phone.
There's a hotline, correct? Like they can just call at any time of day.
Yeah, so there's the CAPS office, which you can do regular virtual appointments, anything from 20 minutes to an hour, or you could also do the hotline, which is the Middle Earth hotline. You can call that anytime during the week and even on the weekends.
And I know that the library they are taking online requests for things, so they still have access to the library services if they need it.
Yeah, because a lot of the resources already were somewhat switched to an online even before the pause, like everything was somewhat in the whole COVID world aspect. A lot of their lives didn't change when they moved into isolation. Obviously, classes and stuff were done remotely. They had asynchronous options to do online anyway for most students. So a lot of times we would call students and they're in class already. They're already talking to professors, or they have an advisement meeting or something in the middle of the day. So we'll call back later and talk with them then. I think Crystal explained a lot of the resources they have pretty well. I think SUNY even put out some guidelines a month or so ago where they laid out all the options. There's tons. And one of the things that this team does is connect them with those resources because students aren't always aware of them. And Middle Earth was a really good example of, and that's peer-to-peer. So you can talk to, students that are working there and they'll work with you on, a lot of the issues and challenges you're having and stuff from that aspect. But, the academic and even the social life of UAlbany students this year has always been a little bit strange, but moving into isolation and quarantine didn't really change that just because a lot of those meetings and those group gatherings were happening online anyway.
Have either of you had to isolate at all or quarantine over the course of the semester?
Thankfully, I have not, besides waiting for test results to come back before we came back to campus.
Yeah.
And the safety precautions before entering campus back in August, but I have not.
No, I have not either. I only had one class on campus anyways. So once we went remote, I was just staying home for, one extra day. Like I was already mostly home, so I didn't have to, thankfully.
What's sort of the morale like? Do you feel like people are sort of keeping each other's spirits up or have this sort of like teamwork, collective good kind of mentality?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, like you mean throughout the team,
I think that like students in general have a sense that this is for the campus, the greater good, and understand why they have to do this.
Yeah, I do. I think so. I think everybody's really supportive of each other. There's a lot of virtual groups that are still like clubs and organizations, and different other groups on campus are reaching out to students saying, hey, like come join this remote session and see other people for, however amount of time, take a break from your schoolwork and just say hello to someone. Like everybody's very positive and supporting of each other.
Well, I'm sure you're looking forward for things to go back to normal.
Yeah, a little bit. And it's it's tough. It's tough, especially a lot of students have, you know, other people living in the house with them. They have children, or they have other people around, and it's hard to focus. So it would be nice to go back to campus and experience the campus like environment when things are going on, like when there's events and stuff. Like, it's just that environment and that excitement is really part of the college experience, and just being a part of something in general.
Both of you are volunteers, right? So what made you decide to take this on in addition to all the other stresses that you guys are dealing with this semester?
I actually technically was placed here for field placement experience, and I am getting credit for it. But I'm in the MSW MPH program, so it's a mix of the social work and the public health in a real world example of the biggest public health and social work issue that's happening right now. And it's really good experience to be on the inside of it. And I do commend the volunteers for volunteering, because it's a lot of work. It's tough. It's tough to be energetic and be a positive outlet for these students when a lot of them are a little sad and lonely. So it's definitely rewarding, but I am getting credit for it.
Full disclosure. But still, that's cool that you're getting that real world experience, and just this it's like a rare opportunity for you.
Crystal is volunteering out of the kindness of her heart.
I am. I enjoy volunteering. It is a lot of work. I will say it's a lot of work. It was a little bit overwhelming at first when you're thrown in and nobody really knows what to expect with COVID and how things are going to play out. We're constantly uploading or updating the database to make it more fluid and function correctly and work better for everyone. And it was a lot, but we have an amazing team. Everybody was working nonstop pretty much since this started, and it's been pretty amazing, honestly. And I think we've helped so many students. Like, I can't tell you how many students have thanked us for what we have done, because we are really their only lifeline sometimes, and getting them what they, I mean, not their only lifeline, but we really help them when they're really alone and everything. So
yeah. Are there like privacy sort of pitfalls that you have to look out for, like not saying who exactly was infected?
Yeah, there's definitely, as a college, we're subject to FERPA, which in addition to that, which kind of, I don't know if it oversees or supersedes HIPAA, but it's kind of the same idea with student information, student data. So the information flow to students is somewhat limited, and that's what actually makes what they do even harder, because they're not provided that information. A lot of times we just get their name when they checked into isolation and quarantine, and that might be it. In fact, I get yelled at by the students all the time. They're like, when does this person get to leave? And I'm like, well, we'll figure it out on our side and we'll talk to them. So then the full-time staff and faculty who are assisting will end up covering on a lot of the backside. But yeah, there is always the privacy aspect. We do have that somewhat limited. A lot of what the student support does is just connecting them with resources. So if somebody says, I need a test or I'm symptomatic, okay, let me get contact with a nurse for you. Here's the number for the nurses so you can talk to them, or here's how you schedule a test. Less of like providing actual medical advice or any of the kind of personal information stuff. But it's almost somewhat of doing it with your hands tied behind your back also. And the students, are obviously able to do that and do it with success too.
And we do have a lot of students who have said, well, all my friends are in quarantine also right now, which is good support for them. It's great to be able to talk about it with your friends while you're all dealing with it. But it gets tricky. They say, my friend left early, or they were allowed to leave before I was, or how come this is their situation? And it gets tricky to just say everyone's situation is different, and
I can't talk about it. It's
right.
Frustrating because everyone's always sort of pointing their finger at, why was that case treated slightly differently?
Yeah, that's the thing I think you have to remember too, is that we're here to talk about you, and I understand that the people around you are important and everything, but my focus is on you and how you're doing and how we can help you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Any other sort of challenges or pitfalls that are tricky to maneuver? Do you ever have to deal with a really upset person who's just like, I'm not doing this, or someone who refuses to comply?
There are definitely students who are very upset about the news and really don't want anything to do with any of it, anything to do with the university, the quarantine, the isolation. They're surprised by the news. They don't understand why they can't do certain things. And it's difficult. It's difficult. Sometimes us students are able to talk them down and let them know the reasons why they have to do what they have to do. But other times we do send them to the supervisors because sometimes they want to talk to somebody else and they don't want to hear from you.
Right.
We do have our supervisors too on backup for them to handle the really difficult cases when I'm telling you what you have to do, but you're saying you don't want to, and that's all that I can really do.
Any sort of like advice for other students that want to help? Are you looking for volunteers still? Do you always need more?
Yeah, definitely. So we're actually in the prime period for recruiting till actually, I think November 30th is our deadline for applications. You know, we've been recruiting a couple students actually who've been through isolation and quarantine who viewed it as such a positive experience. They want to kind of return the favor to some of the other students next semester. It's a really good experience, and if students want to use it for things like credit, like Taylor is doing, there's a lot of work experience requirements or internship requirements with a lot of degree programs, and we can actually help them fulfill that too if they want to do it for more than just a volunteer aspect of it. You know, it's a way to give back to the community and give back to the university and kind of help out their students and students in needs, especially because now everybody probably knows somebody who's had to deal with this situation. So it's an easy way to do that. It's also done fully remote. So it's not, you know, an overburdensome process. You know, you can do it at home. We work within the schedule. We make calls from like 8 in the morning to about 8 o'clock at night, whatever works for their schedule and stuff like that. You can work another job if you have to. I don't know, Taylor, Crystal, what do you have any thoughts on that too?
I just think about how if I were in isolation for 10 days or quarantine for 14 days, how I would feel and how I would want to be talked to and treated. And just knowing that I'm able to provide the calmness and the support and the positivity and the resources and just really talking to the students how I would want to be talked to and being there for them how I would want somebody to be there for me is just kind of nice to think about. Imagine how you would want to be treated if you're in that situation. And if you feel like you're capable of doing that, help us out. It would be great. It's great experience. It makes you feel good. It really does help some of the students. They do appreciate it. But if you are interested, we would love to have more people.
That actually reminds me, one other great thing is, I think Taylor said this when she was talking about the public health crisis of it. You know, there's a lot of fields and a lot of jobs where everybody studies and practices for these type of things, but we actually get to live through it. And it's a great opportunity to kind of learn and really apply those job skills, whether you're an emergency management student, public health student, social work student, to apply those skills in real life situations in somewhat of a controlled learning environment where you can have a positive experience and, you know, go through those experiences and take those with you into life, into your job after.
Yeah, it is great because it's always adapting and we're learning to adapt as it goes, and it's a good skill to learn.
Yeah, it touches on so many different fields. But so are these conversations usually had face to face through Zoom, or is it usually the old fashioned cell phone call?
Phone calls.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I think that's really cool that you guys are sharing that experience and doing your part to help.
Thank you for letting us tell our story.
Okay.